fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Smoker Joe is here, finishing his heading. About time.
Finishing my Writer Joe, Smoker Joe, Minister Joe. I've had all the next 3 weeks. All three of those things are going to happen.
Wow. So, you need a break.
I need I'd say dinner party, big brisket. And then my son's getting married in 3-4 weeks. So, and I'm all that stuff. So I'm a busy guy. I'm not as busy as best-selling, best-writing authors like David. You know.
No, but nobody is.
Who's on the tour interview circuit?
Yeah, God, he's in demand. You know, I think he's even busier than Lady Gaga out there right now. I don't know.
I'm trying. I'm trying to go. I'm trying to just have a Lady Gaga mindset here about how busy I keep myself and all of that. So it's getting some inspiration from Gaga herself.
You wearing the same outfit?
Yeah, exactly.
You're wearing that outfit.
You can't see, but I am. I'm in a Lady Gaga circa 2008 poker face outfit here. So
perfect. That's good.
I wear this for all my radio interviews. This is This is how I get hyped up.
Well, and it's important because that the way you look and the way you feel reacts in what you say, right?
That's right.
Well, it's your disguise kit, right?
That's right. It's this is they issue this when you leave Langley. They give you a disguise kit, and mine just happened to have a Lady Gaga outfit in it.
Wow!
So you win some and you lose some, and I definitely won this round.
Well, Mr. David McCloskey. Now your new book's called The Persian. Before we get into the book, let's talk about what is going on with you. Like, what do you do between books? Is it just, are you focused completely on writing, and did you just do this, or is there other things David does?
There are other things I do. I have, let's say, in no particular order, I have 3 children under 10, so that's part of a job. I co-host a podcast called The Rest is Classified with my intrepid co-host Gordon Carrera, and we tell real spy stories from sort of past and present. We drop 2 episodes a week on that podcast, sometimes 3 if you're a club member. We drop a 3rd episode, so that is keeping me busy, and then I'm writing the books as well. So those 3 things are most of my work, and depending on the day, they could kind of be different percentages, but that's what's keeping me busy these days.
Wow, that's crazy. And you pick up a podcast like that doing it. Are you telling real stories? So are you allowed to tell these stories, or how does that go?
Yeah, so I mean, when I say real stories, it's not like, hey, here's something you've never heard of that I'm just going to tell you about that I did, or that I bring someone on to interview. It's not like that. It's I'll give you a couple examples. So we did a 6-parter on the CIA versus Bin Laden. Kind of telling the story of Bin Laden and eventually, his fight with America and the CIA. And we do that over 6 episodes, all of that stuff. I mean, I might, bring a perspective from the CIA, or, bring in some perspective from someone who was in CTC and was involved in the hunt. But that's all coming from kind of, available open sources, right? And it's a narrative style. So Gordon, his name's Gordon Carrera, he's my co-host. We do kind of, it's meant to sound like a conversation where you've just you pulled up a bar stool, you're sitting next to us at the bar, we're having a really, intelligent and informed, hopefully, conversation about a particular, espionage story. And, you, the listener, or the audience, are kind of, invited to the table. So that's the vibe that we're trying to put out. So it's very much, to get to your question, I mean, it's very much stuff that's out there in the public domain, but maybe not that well known. Everyone knows a little bit about Osama bin Laden, but very few people kind of know the whole story of his life and times all the way, to the point where he's killed. So we're trying to bring that stuff to life.
Right. Well, that's interesting. But it's because it's not too often I've ever been to a bar and I've heard 2 people talking intelligent.
You're going, yeah, exactly. You're going to the wrong bars.
Yeah, obviously.
Maybe the right ones.
Yeah, well, it depends.
But you want to go to Al's bars.
Yeah, you don't go because they're not. No, there's nothing like that going on. But that's a different story. That's a whole show in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Mr. David, so the Persian. What is the Persian about? Let's get the premise out and then get into the book.
Yeah, so the Persian is a spy story set in the middle of the shadow war between Israel and Iran today. And what better sort of introduction to the shadow war than through the eyes of a dentist, right? So the main character is a dentist of Persian Jewish extraction who lives in Stockholm. His family's been in Sweden since the early days of the revolution. And he's really bored. He's sick of being a dentist. His practice isn't doing that well. His name's Kamran Esfahani. He goes by Cam. And he's sick of the Swedish winters. He wants to get out of Sweden. He wants to go to California, right? He's got a California dream. And lo and behold, who shows up in his dental chair, quite literally, but a recruiter for the Mossad who makes him an offer that I think he equal parts sort of can't refuse. It's laced with a little bit of threat, but also doesn't want to. And the offer is go to Tehran, open up a dental practice there. We'll use it as a front for smuggling, kidnapping, targeted killings. And you do that for a little while, you'll make good money. And after you're done, you can go to California. So Cam sets up shop in Tehran, and pretty soon thereafter, people start dying. And not in Iran, actually, but very specific people start to be killed inside Israel. And it's members of Mossad who are part of the group that recruited Cam. And so he is tasked to recruit this woman in Iran who might have access to the group that's plotting these murders. And the operation, I think it's safe to say, it goes completely sideways. But that is not a spoiler, because you figure out in the first pages of the novel that Cam he's writing the book from prison. He's actually in an Iranian prison. He's writing the story as his final confession. So much of the book is actually him writing what happened. And you also figure out of the first pages of the novel that he is holding on to a single secret. And he's held on to the secret for the 3 years that he's been in captivity. And so the story, as it sort of unravels, becomes the story of, well, what is that secret, and can he keep it from his captors until he's killed, and can he keep it from us, the reader?
Hey, David, you get asked this question probably a lot, so I'll try to ask it a slightly different way. Your stories are always maybe before the headline, right? Like the Ukrainian book, you had to sort of go back and rewrite because the world events took over. So you did, that was Israel and Iran. They were doing their thing, and you got a book about Israel and Iran. I'm assuming you didn't go back and rewrite it.
Nope.
Because it was in press, or?
Yeah, it was too late. And the strikes were late June.
Yeah.
The book was basically being printed. And I'll tell you, I was relieved. You mentioned the Russia book. I mean, I had finished the first draft of that book when Putin invaded Ukraine, and I remember thinking, I have to rework this because I can't put a book out in a year plus where we don't even deal with the fact that there's been this invasion. Like, it just, readers would pick it up and kind of think, that's bizarre. And in this case, I was relieved to have the decision made for me that I couldn't even reference the strikes because the book was done. And I think it's probably okay because the focus of the story is on the very below the waterline conflict between the intelligence services. It's not about military strikes. It's not about Iran's nuclear program. So I feel like you can dive into this book and we don't necessarily need to, reference that strike for the world of the novel to feel authentic.
So you built Cam to fit into this story?
I start the books with a vague idea about a setting. So in this case, I started and I basically said, this was, what was it, 2 years ago or so when I started writing it. I said, okay, I'm going to do a Israel-Iran book. That was kind of, Israel-Iran shadow war, right? And then as I go, I find characters, and I found the character of Cam. It's like, okay, there's going to be a guy who's going to be recruited by the Israelis to do some work in Iran, right? Very much in type with how Mossad deals with Iran, right? Is they recruit most of the work done for the Israelis on the ground in Iran is not done by Israelis. It's done by Iranian assets and agents. So I wanted one of those, and then I sort of play around with Cam as a character, and the idea just kind of came to me like, oh, he could be he's recruited outside of Iran. Okay, maybe he's in Sweden. There's a big Persian community in Sweden. If he's a dentist, I don't even know where the idea came from. And then you're kind of playing around with the voice, and as I get going in the story, I'm like, oh, there's something here. And so for me, the construction of the character is just like this very like iterative process to find the voice that just comes from writing the character a lot. And that's how I found him. And so I was like, Israel, Iran, Shadow War. We got a guy who's recruited by the Israelis. Okay, we got the Swedish dentist. And then you're starting to find the character and thinking about, well, what does he do next? And so the plot gets built around the choices of the characters in the end.
Well, it's interesting. So the character himself, you're telling it from his point of view, right? You're saying he's written it. How do you select an angle of what you're going to talk about? What's important to Cam as you write it?
So I think to start, I'm thinking about, like, what does he want, right? Like, what sort of motivations and desires does he have? And in particular, I mean, it sounds really simple to say it, but it took me a while to get there. So I'm like, well, why does this guy want to do this work for the Israelis? I mean, that's a big decision. What's really motivating him to do that? And how do I construct his life, his background, his experience, his family connections, his kind of social atmosphere in Sweden and in Iran to create a compelling character that makes decisions that, you, the reader, can connect with and understand. You might not agree with them, but you can at least understand him. And so I'm kind of starting from that standpoint of his motivations and desires. And then I think over time, as I write, I'm trying to have a sense of ultimately, and this is like the hardest thing to find with a character in this type of book, is like, what's the dilemma that is facing them? And that you can't, like, it's not a problem. You can solve a problem. You can't solve a dilemma. You have to, your perception about your own experience, your life, or the problems in front of you needs to shift to sort of resolve, quote unquote, a dilemma. And so I'm trying to get a sense of, like, what's the dilemma in front of these characters that the narrative, the story of the book, is going to lead them to a new place, right? And over time that presents itself, but it's very rarely known or maybe even knowable in the early stages when I'm discovering the characters themselves and just meeting them for the first time.
No one's really mentioned dilemma in many of these interviews. That's actually a good word. I wrote that word down because it's a good way to put down the conflict, sort of.
Yes.
Internal and external conflict. So, I mean, what's more, important's not the right word, but let's just say when you're making a balance, how do you balance the internal dilemmas and the external dilemmas for your character? Because we all have them.
Yeah, I think, for me, the internal ones are more interesting. And they're fed, hopefully, over the course of the narrative by the external conflicts. Like, they become the arena for the character to work their stuff out. I think primarily is an internal one. But you need the external, you need the reaction, the conflict with the other characters to really make that resonate, I think, with the reader and to make it feel authentic. Because obviously, in our own lives as humans, we're deeply affected by the world around us, and we don't live in some bubble in our heads. And so the external stuff is going to have a tremendous impact on, sort of how we reevaluate who we are, as people, what matters to us, what values we have, all those kind of things. So, I think there's a push and a pull between the two. But for me, the most interesting terrain to work in is what's going on inside these people. Inside their minds and hearts and souls as the book unfolds.
Well, then how do you develop the non-Cam characters? I'll call them secondary, but, the Iranian, the general, and the Mossad, those are sort of major characters, right? But they're not Cam.
Right.
So what's your point of view for creating secondary characters to support your main guy?
Oh, it's the same. It's the same. You don't have a story unless you have conflict. And so I'm always thinking about how all of the characters interact with one another and how the choices made by one of the secondary characters, right, quote unquote secondary, how that affects Cam, let's say in this case. So, you know, there's his Mossad handler, this guy named Arik Glitzman. Glitzman's choices, his desires, you know, Glitzman's dilemma radically impacts Cam. And so I think for the book to land, you know, for you as a reader to feel invested in the world of the novel and in the characters, you sort of need all of those interactions to feel real. And so I need no matter how secondary a character, you know, when you read them on the page, you need to feel like you're engaging with a real person. And so for me, getting the kind of psychology of everybody in the novel, right, is really important to me. It's really important because, you know, we've all read books, I think, where there's a character and you just, you know, you think, this is wooden. This doesn't sound like a real person. I don't buy the psychology. I don't buy the choices. You know, I don't buy the characterization. And, you know, if that happens, even if it's a minor character, I think, you know, the novelist is sort of lost because you've not rendered reality effectively. So I'm always trying to get that psychology right so that you feel like you're encountering real people who are in real conflict with each other throughout the entire book.
So I'm taking it that the most important thing is to capture the reactions to the external events from your characters. That's kind of like the key element in developing that character.
Yeah, I think the key is, so I don't believe that at least for me as a novelist, I won't speak for other novelists. I don't know, everyone's different. I have never been able to really get to know a character through anything other than putting them in scenes with other characters, you know, in conflict, in dialogue, whatever, right? That is how I get to know the characters and hear their voice is situationally, like inside the world of the novel. I'm always trying, and that could be, you know, the character. There's a scene in The Persian, right, where Glitzman, who's the Mossad handler, is taking a nap with his 5-year-old daughter and sitting there, and, you know, he's reflecting on how he sees, like, the state of Israel, how he sees his work for the Mossad, and it's not some kind of interior monologue that I think would actually be really exhausting to a lot of readers in isolation. It's him sitting there, even though she's asleep, almost having these thoughts and in conversation with his daughter. But it's that relational piece that allows me, I think, to bring and to surface kind of aspects of Glitzman's character that otherwise may not have come out in the book, right? But it's always done in relation or in the context of the book, the geopolitical events of the book, the other relationships with other characters in the book. You know, it's I don't think you meet these characters and get to know them and kind of convey their voice without doing that kind of work. And so for me, it's a lot of it, like to kind of be able to write these characters, hopefully well, comes down to putting them in different situations in the book and kind of seeing what they do.
Hey, David, as you have these characters, you know, internalizing and building relationships, is there something more in the book you want people to get out of these characters of the story? They could say the word theme.
Yeah.
But what is it?
For me, I always think it's a little dangerous to talk about theme because even though I do think that books develop a theme and ultimately have one, I never write them with the intent that the reader will like absorb some moral lesson or be educated in some way. Like I'm writing the stories for, like, first and foremost so that they're just consumed and so that the reader wants to find out what happens next. You know, so I'm always writing it with that lens first. But I do think that they all, you know, I've only done this 4 times, right? But each of the books, I think, has kind of taken on a theme to it, or a set of themes that I think sort of are drawn out of, or could be drawn out of the experiences of the characters in the story. And I think in this one, you know, a big part of this turns around this idea of the sort of possibilities for forgiveness. The people in the story, and in particular Cam, I think for understandable reasons, but maybe not noble ones, do some really nasty things to other people. He, over the course of writing his confession, because he's spent 3 years in prison and he's written it hundreds of times in all different ways. And, he's had to come to terms with everything that he's done. And I'm trying to explain this without giving anything away, but he has to confront that head on. And he, I think, is desperate to be forgiven for some of the choices that he's made. And so the book is kind of wrestling with how much power, really love and forgiveness have in a pretty grim world. And, I've written books. I think a lot of the stuff in the genre deals a lot with revenge, and revenge is a powerful thing. And my second novel, Moscow X, dealt a lot with it. But this one's kind of the opposite. It's trying to figure out whether there's actually space for, people who have wronged other people to reconcile and be forgiven this side of eternity.
I can't forgive him. He was the worst dentist ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Made me cry.
My root canal. I won't forgive him for my root canal. It's unforgivable.
Yeah, I'll tell you. That's the story.
That's the last straw. That's the last straw. Yeah,
exactly. That's it. Forget the rest. Well, but the outside world, talking about the influence and stuff on you, because obviously you write about this subject, the political and all this. But does it also deter you from writing? Do you know? Because there's so much going on in the world today that can be negative and positive. Does it deter some of the things you write about or want to write about?
No, it doesn't. I'm never starting. I start with the setting, right, which is kind of like a general sandbox for where I'm going to play around. I'm not really that, and I try to, Israel-Iran shadow war or present day sort of CIA in the last book, present day Russia, Syrian civil war, like setting, from setting springs character and from character springs plot. And so you do have to have some general understanding of what's going on in the world. Like if I'm going to write a, spy novel, the fifth one I'm working on now is set in kind of present day transatlantic relations between the US and the UK. So I need to have some general understanding of what's going on, right? But no matter how terrible that's whatever the situation might be or complex or what have you, ultimately I'm writing a book about people and I'm really endlessly fascinated with people and character. And so I don't, that the sort of geopolitical stuff, even if it's really disgusting and black, it doesn't really bother me because I'm finding a character and I'm trying to understand how that character is navigating a particular situation. And that makes it feel more accessible to me because I don't have to solve any of these problems. I don't have to get ahead of the headlines. I don't have to predict where anything's going to go. I just need to have a character now who's dealing with this situation and figure out where they fit in and what they want and care about, and then I'm off to the races, So it makes it feel more manageable to me.
Well, I have a question, and I know you sort of answered it, but what makes a character? I know you said dilemma, but that's a big thing. Mm-hmm. What makes a character that someone's going to say, I want to read this person, not shut down the book?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think a character is just like a bundle of values, and they could be contradictory or not, but it's a collection of values is expressed through a person. I think what ultimately, and I think this is why so many of us, you could read a book and, Al loves it, Joe hates it, vice versa, is whether you are interested in that particular bundle of values is expressed on the page is a matter for the most part of taste of that character's voice, whether you care, right? These are very subjective things. And there's probably some general rules around, I think you generally want the character to be, interesting characters tend to do maybe somewhat surprising things. They tend to subvert convention, and there's probably a set of rules you could come up with to kind of suggest what generally makes a good character versus a not so good character. But it's going to be a matter of taste at the end of the day. And, it's going to come down to whether you like that character's voice. And I think that, to me, is one of the hardest and maybe most unteachable aspects of fiction, is whether the writer has conveyed and can convey a character's voice effectively, so that readers who have no idea who the writer is and are being introduced to the world of the novel, just they're opening up and going into the story, instantly feel some kind of, not just connection with the character because they might be despicable, but, an interest in what that character is doing, good, bad, and ugly. And that, to me, is like, that's the ultimate art of it, is voice and the construction of a character's voice so that the reader wants to go on the journey.
How do you handle the cultural differences? So, like, you've got Cam in Sweden working and then coming back to Iran. So how do you, are you subtle about it, or is it important to get into their cultural habits or ideas? Yeah,
I think that was one of the, in retrospect, massive challenges I took on in writing a Persian, Jewish, Swedish dentist. I am none of those things. So I had to get kind of a lens, on the different aspects of his personality. I think it's one of the reasons why I found him in the end to be such a compelling character, is because I think so much of fiction is and storytelling in general is centered around this question of, like, well, who am I? Who is this character? Like, who is this person? Really, we're endlessly, as a species, I think, fascinated with people and why people do things. And so if you have a whole bunch of different potential identities you can layer onto someone, it intrigues us and makes us really curious about why they do what they do. You have to answer that question, or to even suggest answers to that question for the characters in a book. Like, you have to be really curious about them as the writer, and you have to be willing, I think, to spend a lot of time just with them, kind of listening to their voice and writing stuff where you try to better understand that voice and capture it without any expectation that it actually goes into the book. And so I do spend a lot of time, like, trying to get the psychology and cultural stuff right, not just from a technical standpoint, because I think there's a bunch of facts about, a dentist or Persian culture or whatever, where, like, you can kind of get the facts right, but, like, how do you weave that into the psychology of the character and the way it's ultimately sort of channeled and expressed through their voice? I mean, that's hard, and that takes a lot of time. And, I try to spend a lot of time talking to people who may have a similar background, set of experiences to my characters, so that I can do a better job of, like, channeling some of their voice. And I do a lot of reading on, not just, like, the geopolitics, and it's probably something I don't do as much reading on, to be honest, in the books, like, more so on Persian culture, poetry, things like that, food, right? What is Iran? What is Tehran actually like? Like, when you read novels that are set in Tehran, so you try to get some sense of, like, over time, the different kind of layers to a personality, and build some kind of lattice work into the book for each person that gives them a richness that they wouldn't have otherwise.
So you go to a lot of dentists?
Go to a lot of dentists. Well, no, it's funny. I mean, in this one, like, I'm like, well, he's a dentist. So I had a dentist, do a read of all the dental stuff in here. And I had an American dentist read it. And then my UK editor sent me a note and was like, I actually know a Swedish dentist. Like, would you want him to read it? I said, sure. Like, I absolutely would, because that is an overlap of two things that I'd love to get his perspective on. And he sent me back a very nice note, and it was quite complimentary for the most part. But he said, you got the numbers of the teeth wrong in the scene, because we use a different tooth numbering system than you do in the States. And so I had the number, I had pulled up the teeth chart for just from, like, the U.S. Dental Association or something like that. And in Sweden, it's a different numbering system. So you always, there's a lot of insight that you can get from just having, others who share some of the backgrounds of your characters, like engage with the stuff that you've written and talk with you about the book. Even dentists, as it turns out.
Yeah. My character is my husband is a character is a doctor of internal medicine. So I went to my physical. I was asking my doctor.
Yeah.
All these questions about exactly how long did you go to school? All these
He's like, what are you doing?
He's like, oh, are you gonna make me a character? No. Let me spin this a different direction to get away from sort of the deep dive into this particular book. I want to, since this is what I've been struggling with, I know he has questions that are important to me. We talked before we got on. I'm writing a book outside of espionage. Have you thought about doing that? Not just because of maybe for the challenge of it, but you get a chance to do different kinds of characters.
Yeah.
And characters are important to you. So have you thought, or have you done, or things that are outside of espionage?
I've thought about it. I haven't gotten beyond like sketching ideas in a notebook, just kind of free form. I honestly don't know when I would have the time to do it at this point. I think at some stage down the line, I would be interested in giving it a try. But I will say, and I have no idea, like, what genre that would be in or anything like that. I will say, though, that I tend to think that I can do a lot of in fact, so far, all of the kind of character investigations or character work that I've wanted to do. Like, I have not felt like the genre has restricted me. I think there's a wide range of human experience that you can capture writing in the spy genre. And I think, to me at least so far, it has felt as wide as anything I might want to write elsewhere. Now, that could change over time, and I think there's certainly like forms and tropes and expectations inside the genre that are constricting. But so far I've found that to be less cumbersome and more freeing, I would say, because there's a sense of conversation over time between, spy writers and spy readers and within kind of the genre itself. So mostly I've found that to be fun and engaging. If it ever ceases to be, I'll absolutely try to write a story in some other part of the literary landscape.
Harlequin romance.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely under a pseudonym. I'll just take all the scraps of all the sex scenes I've written over the years and not put in the books, and I'll just stitch those together into one story. That's my intention. I'm
intrigued.
I probably have a Harlequin romance novel just in my deleted in various Word documents on my computer. I could stitch that together over the course of a long weekend and then put that out as a book. So if all else fails in the spy genre, I can fall back on that.
Yeah, if you need help with dialogue, just ask Joe.
Yeah. I'm a professional on that.
Yeah, he's a romantic, So listen, The Persian, a novel. So it's out now at all of your finer bookstores and Amazon and all that stuff. How do people find you? Are you floating around on social media, or what's going on with David?
I am floating around on social media. I have a website, which is davidmccloskeybooks.com, where you can find out more about me and the podcast and all of that. And then I'm across all the various socials, God help me. And my handle is @McCloskeyBooks across everything. So you can find me online.
I like your Instagram snippets.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, those are sometimes fun, sometimes not. But I am. I've not been as active lately in recording the tinfoil hat videos, but I probably need to get back on the wagon there and put more of that stuff up. We'll see.
Yeah, get to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Quit goofing around.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you doing? So lazy, I'll tell you. You should be working as a dentist too.
I know. Tell me about it.
Well, we'll put everything up on our website so people can find you. And
thank you.
That's great. And what are you working on now? The next book?
I am working on the next book. I am writing book 5. The working title will definitely not stand, so I won't share that with you. But the basic concept is, what would it look like if the U.S.-UK special relationship fell apart and we were spying on each other again?
There you go.
So.
I wonder where you get that idea. No, I don't know.
Turns out it wasn't that hard to do. I started the book thinking, this this might be maybe a little bit too much of a leap, and as it turns out, it was a lot easier than I
Topical.
thought. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, listen, we appreciate you being on the show, and good luck with everything. And what can I say? David McCloskey, the Persian.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Great to be here.
Thanks.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.